I sent you all a blog post that talked about Elvira Hewlett a little bit. And I wanted to structure this talk a little bit about, a little bit around that blog post. So that quick post tells us that Elvira came to the Shakers with her mother and her siblings, but without her father, right after the birth of her youngest brother. We know that she lived at Hancock, that she lived first with the West family and then the Church family. It tells us that she learned and practiced many skills and that she rose to a position of leadership, becoming an eldest in the family. The blog recounts also that in her later life, she may have had a visit with some of her biological family who left the faith when they came of age.
Message though.
And so we want to make sure everybody's on mute, please.
You are, I'll get it.
Great, thank you so much. So just this broad outline of a Shaker life might present a number of questions. And so I thought I'd go about answering these questions that might come up, beginning with how and why did people come to the Shakers? And what constituted a Shaker family in a Shaker settlement? How were these tasks taught that these tasks organized and skills taught that Sister Elvira learned? How did they choose their leadership? And what was their relationship like with the world? I think these are all sort of questions presented by that blog if you're unfamiliar with the Shakers in general. In terms of answering these, it's really important to keep in mind that you can't look at Shaker history as a static image. They were a growing and evolving faith, and they still are. There are two Shakers alive today. They started in 1774, founded by Mother Ann Lee, who was an illiterate, charismatic daughter of a blacksmith from Manchester, New Hampshire. By the middle of the next century, the membership had peaked at about 6,000. So here we have Brother Daniel Crossman overlooking this huge settlement. And by that time, there were over 6,000 members, and they had villages spread from Maine to Kentucky. Over here, we see Sister Lillian Barlow in 1939. By that time, Shaker numbers had started to decline rapidly, and the sisters had taken over a lot of what had traditionally been the brothers' work, as well as expanding their own enterprises in textiles and things like poplar ware. I've often reached for a book called The Shaker Adventure by Marguerite Fellows Melcher. And she tells us that Shakerism was born of the union of religious revivalism and economic need. Since the first Shakers started from scratch without buildings or materials, we can assume that those earliest converts were spiritually motivated to live among these believers who were espousing this new religion, which was anchored in four tenets: the confession of sin, the community of goods, celibacy, and withdrawal from the world. The first land they owned was out in Watervliet at the current site of the Shaker Heritage Site in Albany, New York. But as they gained in numbers, there would have been buildings like this large building here, at which point the advantages of the ethos of work combined with the communal use of property would have made it very clear to someone like Elvira's mother that this was a safe and secure place to bring your family if you didn't have a husband suddenly in the picture to help you raise them. And so that might have been one motivator for people to come to the Shakers. Also, they were a celibate society and they actively recruited. So it's important and interesting to note, Mother Lucy Wright led the Shakers from 1796 to 1821, and she did a number of really important things. But one of the most important decisions was to resume missionary efforts. So she sent several of the society's best speakers on journeys through New York and New England. During this time, the population increased more than 42% between 1800 to 1820. In 1805, she observed the beginnings of what is now known as the Second Great Awakening, which was a broad Protestant revival in the US. And she sent speakers westward at that time. In traveling through Kentucky, Ohio, and Indiana, this effort resulted in the founding of 7 more communities, raising the number of villages from 11 to 18. I included this picture of this camp meeting here, although that's much later. They continued to visit the camp meetings as ways to proselytize and increase their numbers. Mother Lucy also established the novitiate or gathering orders for the purposes of laboring with and initiating those who were or might be prepared to receive the gospel. So this is actually a painted postcard of the North family site, which the Shaker Museum stewards over in New Lebanon, New York. And at such a place as this, the elders and eldresses of the gathering orders would have been appointed to these places because they were the most gifted in gathering potential converts, and life in the gathering order was designed to habituate novitiates to Shaker life before moving them into other parts of the community. So they recruited and trained people as they came in. During and after the Civil War, the Shakers also increased their numbers by adopting a lot of orphans. They applied themselves to the business of education with the same meticulous work ethic they did to everything else. And so they were known to provide a really strong education and often educated children from neighboring towns and farms, as well as children within their own communities. So family life in the Shakers, a Shaker family would have been 50 to 100 people. And we see in our collection, I think I want to go back one, in our collection that the scale of the artifacts tells the story of living in these great groups. So this chest of drawers would have been over 6 feet tall, and in a bedroom with 5 or 6 people living together, that you would have needed that much space to store all your clothes. This beautiful table is something that was over 12 feet long. So big families required them to make furniture and accommodate themselves in larger ways than normal families. Another thing that might have been important to remember is that there would have been rules that were important in living with that many people. So Shaker dining room would have been a very loud place. So meals were silent. People were not allowed to speak at all, and all the table settings would have been in groups of 4 so that you could always reach what you needed. You didn't even have to ask for food to be passed to you. Household tasks such as laundry, all of these things were scaled up and organized to meet each person's needs. So if at this point, you might really think about how the advantages of the Shaker communal life might have compared to people, say, in the 1820s in neighboring farms looking in. So a traditional farming family would have had to cope with crops and livestock and cooking food and laundry all in a day. A Shaker might have been assigned to one of these tasks and count on their brothers and sisters to fulfill those other needs. So it was very efficient, and they were able to achieve a really high standard of living compared to their neighbors at this time. And also a quick note about the children in the picture, which will be relevant in the next thing here, that skills and chores were shared by everybody, including elders and eldresses when they were available to do so. But in each of these pictures, you also see children. So when we talk about how skills were taught, not only were they educated academically, they would have been brought on as apprentices in all the other tasks and things that they needed. So in lots of pictures, we see there are young people there to help as labor and also to learn skills. Now I want to shift a little bit to talk about the leadership, what leadership was like and how one became leaders. In the Shaker Adventure, Melcher describes the Shakers as an aristocracy of ability on the practical side and a self-government of divine theocracy on the spiritual. And the ministry was self-perpetuating. They chose and trained their own replacements. Elders and eldresses were in charge of all spiritual concerns and matters of policy for their respective communities. This included the calling and conducts of meetings, preaching, and hearing the confessions of sins. For the management of more temporal affairs of the community, they appointed deacons and deaconesses. So, and it's important to note, and the reason I have this basket up, that the spiritual life of Shakers is intrinsically part of their material culture. The elegant design and the impeccable craftsmanship for which they became so well known are products of the Shakers' unique integration of spiritual well-being with communal living and attention to their practical well-being. The extraordinary quality of their work is a cumulative result of the values which defined their faith and their daily practices. So gender equality and the inclusion of different races and abilities are all actually crucial elements of these achievements and all they were able to make. Within our archives and our pictures, we can document that creating this environment for the purposes of living a Christ-like existence was intentional by design, and it was explicitly pursued. Just from this picture up top is a snapshot you can find as a PDF in our collection from the orders and rules given to office deacons in 1799. And they were called upon, it is binding upon the deacons to use and improve the joint interest of the church for the benefit of the members thereof by providing all things necessary for their support, comfort, and convenience according to their ability. So it was explicit that you were to use the wealth of the family to help you do the work and be comfortable while you did it. And then there's this wonderful clip that was on a can, I guess it was a picture, it was a gift made from people that says, I feel that you are worthy of a mother's love and care, and if you will be faithful, this you shall ever share. Be patient then in crisis, for many you shall see, but heaven will bear you through them. Receive this world from me, your constant and true friend, Eldris Ruth. And I wanted to include that because it's notable in a number of messages and journals like this, that there was a real sense of maternal love and care. And although they were certainly strict in terms of their practices and ensuring that everyone lived a life of humility, they were also very warm and encouraging. It was not sort of a stoic, puritanistic existence. And I think that is something that sometimes people don't know. And finally, I just wanted to mention a little bit about the different ways that the Shakers interacted with the world. They were entrepreneurs, and so through their sales and businesses with the world, at least the leaders and deacons would have been interacting a lot. They held a number of patents for, like this in the bottom left is a water turbine, and they did not invent the water turbine, but so many different Shaker villages depended on it that they made improvements to the water turbine that they patented. And so there would have been even, legal interaction with governments to do that. You could do a million talks about some of the different interactions they had, but they were also just friends. And this picture on the right of Elder Sarah Neal with her friend, I think is so touching because you really see the differences in their two worlds. Where they're existing, that the Shakers were interacting with the world, but living very differently by choice and by discipline. So when we think about Sister Elvira, it seems not unlikely that she might have been allowed in those later years to travel and visit with people. And so after all of that, when we look back at Sister Elvira's rugs again, I hope that this gives you a little sense of who she was in terms of her life and how her brothers and sisters would have come to the Shakers as well. And that these rugs are really in the same way that that basket and those drawers are examples of how all the Shaker values and practices enabled them to make these beautiful things. The same would have been true for Sister Elvira and how she made her rugs. And I hope that maybe tells you a little bit about Shakers if you haven't known about them before. And I included this last slide so that I didn't forget at the very end, after we talk about all our knitting, that we are in our annual fund season. And so programs like this are possible because of people who purchase memberships and who donate to us. We appreciate support of any kind. If people are participating and sharing these things with their friends, that also really helps us. So in any way you are able to support us, we appreciate that and hope you will.